Welcome and good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for our Destination MBA Alumni event. So today we're going to be chatting. We have two MBA alumnus on with us who both have engineering backgrounds. My name is Fanae Croft. I'm the field marketing manager. I do events all over the country. I talk with candidates all the time, and engineering is a growing segment. As much as 25% of the classroom these days is made up of folks who were previously engineers or have engineering backgrounds. So it's becoming more important that we have this conversation. We have resources available for those who are thinking about charting that course. So yesterday we had three panelists who are current MBA students who had engineering backgrounds. So we had two who had been in industry before. We had another person who was an engineering dual major with an MBA. So it's really robust conversation about their journeys, and we're hoping that we will do and have the same conversation today. So thank you for my guests who are joining us today. We have Jeremy Williams, who he received his undergraduate degree at Miami University, went on to get his MBA from George Washington University. Hello, Jeremy. Thank you for joining us today.
Hello, thank you.
And then we also have Adriana Winfield. She received her undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley. That was an chemical engineering BS. She went on to get her master's in engineering and also has an MBA. So she'll have a lot of perspective about master's versus MBA. It should be a really robust conversation. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And first things first, though, I know you're watching via YouTube, and we want to make sure we're answering your questions. So we'll talk for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then from there, we want to answer the questions that you have. So as we have our discussions, you might have a question right now that you're looking to have answered. Pop it into the comment section, and we'll make sure that at the end of the event, we address any questions that you have. As they come about, just pop them in that comment section, and we'll get to them from there. So let's shift to our panelists. Adriana, will you tell us a bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. And growing up, I loved math and science, especially chemistry, which is why I decided to go to Berkeley and get my degree in chemical engineering. When I graduated from Cal, I was offered a job at Raytheon, which is an aerospace defense company. And I worked in their materials and process engineering department. And while I was working there, I also pursued my master's in systems engineering part-time at UCLA. So after being at Raytheon for about 5 years, I really wanted to transition into a project management role, especially at a company that is very engineering driven or technology driven. So I decided to go back and pursue my MBA at UCLA Anderson. And I picked UCLA specifically because I wanted to build a network within the Los Angeles area because that's where I wanted to stay long term. It's also a top MBA program. And then they also have a technology focus, which is what I wanted to focus on coming from an engineering background.
Okay. Jeremy, how about you? Tell us about yourself and help us understand how you got from working in industry to going on to obtain your MBA.
Sure. Well, first of all, hello, everybody. I originally grew up in the Midwest in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I got my engineering degree in mechanical engineering from Miami University in Ohio. And, upon graduating with that degree, my education was more focused on mechanical design. And at that time, when I graduated in 2010, not a lot of companies were hiring, for R&D or design at that time. So I was in manufacturing, I found out pretty quickly that manufacturing wasn't quite for me. So I pretty much decided pretty shortly after that I would start pursuing other avenues through education, and whether it would be a master's in engineering or an MBA. I hadn't quite decided yet, but I read some statistic about how a lot of Fortune 500 CEOs have engineering backgrounds, and I don't have many aspirations to be a CEO or anything, but it just surprised me that many had engineering backgrounds. And the more I researched it, the more I found that companies like someone with an engineering background in the business world. So I made that decision to get my MBA, and I chose George Washington University for a lot of different reasons, but mainly because I thought that it would give me more of a global perspective. One of their big selling points is that half the class is from outside the United States. So that was a big draw for me to just kind of think outside of my, I guess, box, I suppose would be a good way to put it. So that's my journey in short, I guess.
Okay. That's interesting. You all hear echo?
No?
No? Okay.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of echo.
You do? Okay. Hopefully it'll clear up.
Actually not
right I think now,
I did hear it.
I think we're okay.
Yeah.
So I just want to piggyback on what Jeremy was saying about CEOs and those in leadership having that engineering background. And I've done a lot of research, and that's actually true. Even so, with Jeremy is actually one of my colleagues who works in product management here at the Graduate Management and Mission Council. And quite a few of our leaders have backgrounds in engineering as well. So it's starting to become a lot more common. And speaking of that, can you tell us a little more about what you're doing now, Jeremy?
Sure. Well, as Finney said, I'm a product manager here at GMAC, and I work specifically on the GMAT exam. And part of my role is understanding what our candidates are doing, their behaviors, how they're approaching the test, what they do, how they feel while they are taking the test, and coming up with kind of more innovative ways of helping alleviate testing anxiety or giving candidates the tools that they need to approach the GMAT from a way where they won't see it as a barrier and more as like a door, I suppose, into their next career or next path. So that's one of my main roles. Another is just coming up with new features of the GMAT. So like this past year, we did select section order, where now you can pick your order of your exam. Whereas when I took it, I'm sure Adriana is the same, you couldn't do it. You had to take it one way. So, a lot of my job is just, taking our candidate data and finding solutions to the problems that our organization has. So.
Well, kudos to you, Jeremy. I meet candidates all the time that are excited about that feature. So good move there. Adriana, what are you doing now?
Yeah, so I'm working at Southern California Edison. It's a utility company, so we provide electricity to 5 million customers. And I'm part of an MBA Leadership Development Program. So I joined the company in July of 2016. So since I've joined, I've worked as a project manager in 4 different departments. So I started in regulatory affairs, and then I moved on to a risk management role. And from there, I worked in strategy. And then just a couple weeks ago, I started in a group that we call Energy Procurement Management. So basically, as a project manager, I've led a lot of projects, worked cross-functionally across the organization with stakeholders as well as subject matter experts. I also just wanted to add on to what you guys were saying about the CEOs coming from engineering and business backgrounds, because at Southern California Edison, Kevin Payne, he has a mechanical engineering background. Wow. And then I believe he also has like an MBA, or he definitely has some kind of business background as well. So,
okay. Take that step back with me though, Adriana. Did you always know, like when you were an undergrad, did you know that you would go on to get a master's degree and get an MBA, or did this just evolve over time?
So in undergrad, I knew I wanted to go back for graduate school. I wasn't entirely sure. I knew I wasn't going to stop at a bachelor's, but as I was taking classes, I remember I took a class with one of the chemical engineering professors, and he mentioned that having an engineering background and also having that MBA just opens a unique set of doors, especially if you want to become a leader. And that's something that was my career desire, to go into leadership and to go into general management. So that was like my first, really thinking deep about going into an MBA. And then I also just saw it when my previous company, I worked for Raytheon And I also saw it there where people were, when they transition into a managerial role, a lot of times people are going back and pursuing their MBAs.
Okay. What about you, Jeremy?
Well, similarly, I always knew that at some point in my career, I would get a master's degree. That was part of my decision in undergrad to get a engineering degree, was that expectation that I was going to take that next step to get a master's. But it wasn't until I actually, started working a little bit and figuring out kind of where I wanted my career to go, that I chose the MBA path rather than either the master's and then MBA or just the master's.
Now, I meet a lot of people who have the engineering, say they're currently in industry and they're trying to figure out, okay, I think I might want to do an MBA, but I don't know how. I don't know if I want to leave my company. So they consider part-time. And it seems that most engineers at least consider it. How did you decide that you were going to go full-time versus a part-time program?
So at the time, I was working for Fiat Chrysler in the Detroit area. And, engineers have good jobs for the most part. So I had a good job. I liked it. I had a great boss and everything. And so, my first thought was part-time, was a part-time program. But, in that area, there's only so many schools that you can go to. So, I thought about, well, what do I really want to do with this MBA? Do I just want it to be a credential, or do I want it to change, my function or my industry or my job title or what have you? So from there, I as I was searching for, potential programs, it kind of, blossomed into something where I didn't think that part-time would be the best fit for me. Because I was looking to change the job function and industry, I guess, completely. So, I thought that it wouldn't be fair to myself to be working and also be getting an MBA, because I don't think it would be, well, it wouldn't be fair for either, really. I don't think I could have devoted 100% of attention to either my job or, focusing on a new career path. So, I was able to pursue full-time MBA program, but I mean, it's really up to whatever your personal career goals are, or what you want to get out of your MBA program.
Sure. Did you have that same consideration, Adriana, or did you know that you were going to just go straight to a full-time program?
No, yeah, I had the same consideration. I definitely looked into the part-time programs, but I also talked to a lot, like I set up informationals and talked to people who had gone to different business schools. And what I noticed is a lot, like the advice I received was, if you want to switch both industry and function, which is something that I wanted to do, that it's easier to do that if you go full time, because you're able to fully devote your time to networking. You're able to versus balancing the two. Like when I got my master's in systems engineering, I did do that part time. So I definitely considered doing it for the MBA, but because this time I wanted to switch both industry and function, which I did for the summer internship, which is, it's also kind of nice if you go full time because you're able to do a summer internship. So my internship was it was in the healthcare industry, so Johnson & Johnson in marketing. So I switched industry and function there, and then post MBA now, utility and project management. So yeah, basically I think going full time is definitely, if you want to switch industry and function, that's and if you can financially, it's the way to go. But if you're looking to more move up within your same company, then I think part-time could definitely be like an option.
Yep. So the decision so it sounds like it was most about the function change, so I do meet people as well who will say, well, I'll get a master's in engineering, or I plan to get my master's in engineering. And it seems like you did that in a part-time capacity. And so then you received the credential, but that didn't seem to be enough. would that have been a different path for you? Or do you feel like the MBA was able to open up just different opportunities?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is the function piece. So the reason I got the first master's was because in aerospace defense, systems engineering is a very valuable like knowledge base to have. So that was kind of why I went and got the first master's, because I was trying to move up within the organization that I was in at the time.
Okay.
And then because I wanted to long-term get into the general management, and I didn't have any business background. I had a strong engineering background, but no business background. The best way to do that would be to go ahead and pursue the MBA, and then full-time, just because I'd be able to allocate more time, resources to like making that happen, making the industry as well as the functional switch happen.
Okay. Jeremy, take me back to business school. So when you were applying, how do you feel like your experience as an engineer helped you stand out? So it's becoming more common, and maybe it's because you have an engineering background that you know these statistics. But I run into people all the time who have the assumption that, well, I don't have a business background. That may make me less of a candidate, or I might not be able to do as well because I don't have that business background. So from your perspective, how do you feel like it helped you to stand out having that engineering experience?
Yeah, so I think having the engineering experience definitely helped me stand out from the quantitative standpoint, because top MBA schools, they want to see candidates that can, they're confident can perform well in the quantitative arena. And that's because a lot of the core classes are quant heavy, like there's statistics, and then there's like accounting. So that, they want to make sure that you can do well in those subject areas. So showing that you've gone through engineering before proves that you have that strong quantitative background. And so I think that definitely helps you stand out as a candidate. And I think it also helps to some extent when you're studying for the GMAT, because at least for me, the math portion, it was easier for me to score well in that area because I had an engineering background.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Jeremy?
Yeah, I think echoing a lot of what Adriana said, we in engineering undergrad, the work that we do is most likely going to be a lot more intense, at least quantitatively, than most business school programs. So, I think there's nothing to worry about from the course load. I think that gives us an advantage. We won't be overwhelmed by any of that, but also just the way that engineers are taught to think critically and kind of follow more scientific method approach to problem solving. I think especially nowadays, that's a major advantage with data analysis and business analytics being a growing and big part of MBA programs. So yeah, I think those are three things that, give engineers a little bit of a, I don't know if I'd say an advantage, but just something that, someone with a business background or another background won't have, and would be valuable to add to an incoming class.
Sure. Okay. So I will echo that. If you just look at the data and you cut the test takers by background or undergraduate major, engineers do score higher than anyone else. So feel good about that. Be encouraged. That could be a strength for you. But speaking of the GMAT exam, how did you fit studying for that into your schedule?
Well, for me, it was pretty tough actually, because my role at the time, I was traveling about 2 weeks out of every month. So I had to do a lot of studying in hotel rooms, airplanes, whatnot. And, if it's something you're really committed to, you just have to make time for it.
Yeah.
So, I could have easily, and I did sometimes, put off, well, I'll just do something tomorrow, not today. But, at the end of the day, you have to just kind of buckle down and even an hour a day, just incremental studying was good for me. So yeah, it was tough, but obviously got through it pretty well. So
what about you?
Yeah, so living here in Los Angeles, I mean, you guys probably heard the traffic here is horrendous. So when I first started studying for the GMAT, I was driving 3 hours every day round trip, so an hour and a half each way. And I also took on like this new role where I was leading a small team of engineers, so my job was getting really demanding as well. So I literally moved right next door to my job. So it was like a 15-minute walk, 10-minute driving door to cubicle basically. And so I then took those 3 hours and used that every single day to study for the GMAT. And then on weekends, I also set aside time to take a practice test. So every weekend, I took a practice test, and then during the week, just time block that time. So really, basically, just I would say look at where your inefficiencies are, cut those, and then dedicate it head on to the GMAT. That was pretty much what I did.
Yep. Oh, that's great advice. I always tell people there's no way around it. So advantage, think of it, feel confident, engineer, you're gonna, have some pluses going into it, but GMAT is a reasoning exam and that time is gonna matter. You just have to spend it. You gotta dedicate it. And I like how both of you expressed that you made it happen. You carved out the time, you fit it into your schedule in a routine way and was able to tackle it that way. And obviously you both were successful because you've gone on and completed your programs. When it came to figuring out where you were going to go, how did that process go for you? I know that prior to really developing content for engineers, when I was doing research, it seems if my goal was to understand how the engineering complements the MBA, and there wasn't a lot of information out there as it relates to the two together per se. So what routes did you take to research school, and then how did you arrive at what program you were going to attend?
Yeah, so I visited a lot of schools and went to, like, they have prospective students events, they have like diversity events. I went to a lot of events that the schools had. And so through that, exchanging business cards, that, basically led into me setting up some informationals with people who had an engineering background. What are they doing now? Sort of thing. So a lot of it was doing that type of research. And then I also just looked and tried, because usually the school has a specialty. So with Anderson Tech, they consider themselves to be a tech school. So it's basically a tech specialization. So coming from an engineering background, I wanted to go to a school that was going to, basically have that technology focus.
Okay. How about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, and for me, I didn't really focus too much on kind of the class profile of, how many engineers or do they cater to engineering or anything. I focused more kind of on what I wanted to do afterwards and where I wanted to do it. So, I think Adriana said earlier that she went to UCLA because, she wanted to work there and live in that area. So I think that was a big key for me, is where would I want to go to school or where would I want to live and work after school? And do they have programs or schools where I can get the type of MBA that I want, where I could concentrate? For me, it was concentrate on marketing, because they don't really have a product management concentration, but more so marketing and business analytics, because I thought I could tie in my more technical analytical background into kind of a more forward-facing marketing business role. So those were my two main criteria, I guess, for when I was searching.
Okay. What do you feel like was your biggest challenge in school and your biggest reward, I guess?
Well, for me, I guess the biggest challenge was just learning and being comfortable with networking again. I was being thrown into a room with people from all sorts of different backgrounds and from different cultures and things like that, just networking amongst my classmates and then networking in a totally new, job area, because, being in engineering, we're not as, social, I guess, in the workplace as, as people in marketing or something like that. So for me, that was the biggest challenge. It was just getting comfortable and used to networking both within my program and with potential employers and internships and at career fairs and things like that.
Okay.
And the biggest reward, the biggest reward was actually achieving kind of the triple jump of changing job function, industry, and geographic location. So, putting in that work and the time, that was the biggest reward that I reaped from that. So.
Nice. So it sounds like what you went in for, you got out of it. So
yeah.
Just to accomplish that was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What about you, Adriana? Biggest challenge and then biggest reward?
Yeah, so my biggest challenge, I would say, it was time management. So like in business school, especially in the full-time programs, I mean, you're balancing the academics, there's club events you can go to, there's, informationals you can go to, like for networking, job search, there's social events. There's just so many things going on, and a lot of times the events conflict. So, I mean, it's impossible that you do all of it. So I would say that was the biggest challenge, is just picking, basically prioritizing and picking what was important to me. For me, because it was my first time looking at, because I had a strong engineering background, but had no business background, academics was important, as well as just developing that network. And so I would say the biggest reward was actually developing a strong network and learning how to network, really, because in engineering, that's not taught as much or emphasized as much. And so coming out of business school, I had 3 job offers because I was, I learned how to communicate my value, which, learning that was, and networking was, very helpful, because I feel like in the business world, they want people that are smart, but then you also have to be able to communicate your value proposition as well. So yeah, that was probably the biggest reward for me, is developing a strong network.
I appreciate that you said that, because I think that oftentimes, I know I used to think that once upon a time, you can think about an advanced degree sometimes as a means to an end, or, well, I want to move up, so then I need these credentials. And that may sometimes give the impression that any program may do it, or any type of program. But speaking to, like you said, part-time, I think some part-time programs are many, but it just depends on what your goals are. But I think you both articulated that well in the value that the full-time program offered you, and being able to network, and how that in itself is something that leads to opportunity. So it's not really even as much about what you learned in the classroom, as much as it's who you were able to connect with in those classrooms, and then their networks beyond that, and what that does for you, and how that enriches and forge your career. So that's an aspect that I think is lost sometimes when you're just thinking about the MBA, or what can it do for you. Sometimes people even feel like, well, I'm already working my way up. I really don't need it. So it's that piece that sometimes isn't talked about as much. But when I do events like this with folks like yourself, they always talk about that as one of the main pieces. So I just think it's interesting, that gap of understanding that most people don't even realize that that's such a selling point and such a benefactor of the MBA, that network. So I just wanted to piggyback on that. Speaking of your programs, you mentioned about the approach. Did your school have any organizations or anything that helped, that may help a student who has that combination, or is looking to get that combination of engineering and MBA? Were there any organizations that were helpful along the way?
Yeah, so at UCLA, there's basically the technology club that is definitely an area of interest for people with engineering backgrounds, and they also have an Easton Technology Leadership Program, which is a program where you could take technology classes. And I've also seen some people take classes in, like, an elective in the School of Engineering, as well as do different side projects with people from, like, the School of Engineering. So that's definitely a way in which you can leverage both your backgrounds and see a little bit of both, like the engineering side as well as business.
Okay. Jeremy, if you had to sum it all up, what's been the biggest impact? And I know you spoke about it like in various questions, but just the biggest impact to your career overall with getting the MBA.
Well, for me, I mean, we just touched on this, but it was the addition, or I guess the expansion of my network. Now it seems that, you know, in the next 30 years of my career, I know pretty much anyone in almost any type of industry or job function. So if in 5 years I'm like, you know, I'm done being a product manager at GMAC, I want to do something else, you know,
Yeah.
I can tap into my own network to make it easier to transition in the future to a different role or function. But I mean, there's a lot that an MBA can bring to you, and the network is just kind of a small portion of that. It helps you grow as a person, because you're dealing kind of outside of what you're used to. You're outside of your comfort zone in a lot of situations. For me, you know, one of the reasons why I went to George Washington was because of its international makeup. So I found it really rewarding that, you know, now I have, you know, a little bit more of a baseline starting point for people from other countries and how they might approach a business problem that's different than I would approach it, or as any engineer or any American would approach it. So, I mean, those are probably two of the biggest things that I got out of it.
Adriana?
Yeah, so I would definitely echo the network, but in addition to that, I would say it's also helped me in my current role as a project manager. Because I mean, before business school, right? I just had, you know, I had a strong engineering background. I felt like I had a good broad understanding of engineering as well, because I did the systems engineering, so you have to kind of understand multiple engineering disciplines. But I didn't know like really anything about business, and so being able to take classes in strategy, economics, and finance, I think has helped me in my current job, because my last role was working in strategy. The role I had before that, I was also working with some people who had an economics background. So just being able to communicate both in the business language and then also the engineering language has been very helpful to me in my current role. So.
Okay. What advice would you give to someone who is just thinking about it?
I would tell them to really know where they want to go long term, like essentially why MBA. You know, it's something you have to know to even apply to business school. But I would think deep about it and understand where you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years, and see basically if the MBA is going to help you get there. So I think that's you know, the number one piece of advice that I would give is just have a plan for your career, you know, and see how like the MBA fits.
Okay. Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. Don't just get an MBA to check a box or to, you know, get one because you think you need one. Actually sit down and think about your career path and your personal and career goals, and if that is absolutely something that you want to do or that you need to do now. And you know, it may not be right now. It may be 5 years from now, but you really need to just take some time and think about, you know, why MBA, exactly what Adriana said. So.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see if we have any questions. If you have any questions, drop them in. I see we have one here, so we'll go ahead and address that if we can. The question is about what schools are best for students who just graduated versus folks who've had work experience. I think it might be a challenging question to answer because it's always going to be so such an individualized response. But if either of you happen to have any thoughts, you know, while doing your research, if you came across one versus another, whose programs seem to lean in one direction or another. I would imagine this is as it relates to a person with an engineering background.
Sure. I mean, I don't have any specific programs in mind off the top of my head, but some great resources are, you know, rankings can be subjective, but there are a lot of rankings out there for part-time programs. I'm sure there's something for best programs for engineers and things like that. So, I mean, that would be a starting point, I think, and then just researching those, and maybe you find similar programs like those that take you in a whole new direction. But I think that would be a good starting point, because it really is an individual decision. I mean, something that would be great for me could be horrible for Adriana, and vice versa. So I think that would be a good place to start.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Jeremy said. I know some of like the school, like some of the books that they have that rank the schools, like they basically say the average average years of work experience a person had prior to going to business school. I would say across most of the top MBA programs, it's probably around 5 years work experience. But I have seen, like, I mean, there are people in my class who have, I mean, there's people on all ends of the spectrum, I guess is what I'm getting at. I've seen people in my year that had like 1 year work experience and then went and got the MBA. But yeah, I would just kind of research those books, because when I was applying, I pretty much had 5 years already, so I wasn't really focusing on going straight out of undergrad.
Yep. And I would add there, back to Jeremy's point, that there are a lot of sources that will aggregate a lot of this information. U.S. News and World Report, the Financial Times, Bloomberg, they'll put together tons of lists. If there are any programs in particular that hop out at you, if you go onto their web pages, it's going to always give you information about the class profile. It'll tell you the average number of work experience, average GMAT scores. It'll tell you all of that information. If you're interested in just researching schools in general, you can go on to mba.com/engineers, and there's a search tool. If you click the search tool, it'll bring up various programs. And the programs that come up within that particular page are programs that might have an element of engineering or something, an accompaniment that is engineering. But if you're in that search tool, you can then expand your search to just include all types of schools that don't have that specific interest. So that's also a place to start, where you could compare different programs and get some of the insights you might be looking for. So I had another question about the challenges. I think you all talked about it a little bit, but if you could go into more detail about some of the challenges you faced while studying for the GMAT. So it sounds like, I know from both of you, you mentioned time. So that was a factor. Were there any other elements of either preparing for the exam or certain aspects of the exam that were challenging for you?
Yeah, for me, I mean, a lot of times the standardized tests, like, I mean, I have like the strong quant piece, right? But then the verbal part is what gets me. So that was definitely a challenging area for me. And so the way I worked around that was, I mean, taking a lot of practice tests. So I took, the GMAC practice test, because that's most likely, I mean, GMAC writes a GMAT exam, right? So that's like a great way to prepare, because that's pretty much most, like what you're going to see going into the exam. And then I also just really focused in on the weak areas. So like within verbal, like, if you take certain practice tests, they'll break it down, like within critical reasoning or within, reading comprehension, like this particular area you need to focus on. And so then I just really honed in on those weak areas. And I also even hired a tutor. So, to really help me in the weak area, which was for me. So,
what about you, Jeremy?
Yeah, I would reiterate the practice test thing, and not just taking them, but sitting down and sitting through the entire 4-hour practice exam, simulating as best you can, because it can be tiring and arduous a little bit. So that's one thing I wish I had done more, was take more practice tests, because, engineers are probably going to have a pretty good quant score. Depending on your role or how much you read, you might have a good verbal score, but putting those all together, back to back, I think that's one of the best things you can do. And as many times as you can do it is most beneficial.
Awesome. I'd add there on the simulating the experience of the exam. We've done a few sessions where we'll have one of our psychometricians on, and whenever we ask her what her number one tip is, she always says that simulating the test center as much as possible. And they've both spoken to that. So one way is with those practice exams that come from our organization. They're going to have you'll be able to select your section order. Now with Jeremy's new feature, I'm giving you all the credit for it. With that new feature, it's going to have the same scoring algorithm. It'll also give you that diagnostic so you can dig into those areas that so you can even have an understanding of, where you're strong and where you're weak. Also, even as it relates to studying, when you get in that test center, it's going to be really quiet. You might have someone moving around, you might not have them, you're going to have your scratch. It could potentially be really different from relaxing on the couch with your music, with your feet up. There are all those things that you want to consider. But I like what both of you have to say. When I get the question, I kind of say exactly what Adriana did. You start on your own, you dig in so that you really understand what you need, because it's a reasoning exam. So it's really about understanding yourself, what you need, where you're strong, where you're weak. Once you get that information, you can then make better decisions moving forward. So I always tell people that it's not my recommendation to say, it's time for me to take the GMAT exam, let me go sign up for a course. I'd say approach it like Adriana did. You go in, you figure out what you need, where you're strong, where you're weak, and then you can make a really informed decision on what your next step is. I need a tutor. I need someone to help me through this part. I need an online course that just digs into IR. So hopefully you can take those tips and they'll be helpful. Jeremy, we have a question specifically for you. Did you feel that the international exposure you got at George Washington, that you're able to still apply that today in your current role? Do you feel like it was it's impactful or it's been lasting?
Yeah, absolutely. Here at GMAC, we're a pretty international organization ourselves. So, just being comfortable interacting with people from other countries is something that, I became more comfortable at GW, and something that I do almost every day here at GMAC. So, yeah, I feel that my international exposure is something that I still benefit from today and will benefit from, going forward. So.
Yeah, once you got it, you just got it, huh?
Yeah, I think so, a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a question about what's considered the most acceptable GMAT scores to most schools. So I'll take that one. There isn't a standard score as it relates to schools. It really is going to vary. If you ask the average GMAT score, period, that's going to be around a 500. But you have to consider there that considers everyone who's taken the exam, and people take the exams for various different reasons. They're applying to various types of programs that all have different requirements. So when it comes to getting some insight on what score you should shoot for, you're going to want to go on to the websites of schools that you're considering. Again, that profile is going to give you, it's usually like a median middle 80% of their current class. It'll tell you the median 80% of their score. So you'll see a range, let's say from 650 to 760 or something like that. Once you get that information, that gives you an idea of where you should be aiming for as it relates to your GMAT exam score. And that range could vary depending on what tier program you're looking at. So again, that's going to really vary. So just pop in a few different schools you're interested in. It may even make sense. Let's say you're thinking about a local program, and then you're thinking about, a top 10 program. It could vary in terms of what that score range is. So start there, and that'll help you to understand where you should shoot for. Then we got an additional question. How were you helped with merging your engineering background to your new business background? to find the opportunities where the combination is desirable. So I think the question is, did you receive any help or assistance to help you understand how the complement of the two of them would then, impact your career or help you to get to where you want to go?
So like before business school, right? Or are they talking about like after business school, how we merged them?
Well, I don't know. Let's see if we can get clarifying information there. But so I think addressing it both ways let's do it both before business school and after.
So before business school, a lot of it was just doing research. Luckily there's LinkedIn, so you can look at people who have MBA, who have engineering background, and see where they're at, and then basically kind of get them as mentors, or ask them, get some assistance there on how you can merge the two and how you can use the two. I would say in my current role, because I work as a project manager at a utility company, and utilities are very engineering driven. There's a lot of engineers here. So I've been able to merge both of the backgrounds. Like one of my, like when I was in the risk management role, it's basically working in transmission and distribution. So it's a very electrical engineering heavy. There's a lot of electrical engineers there. So I was able to leverage some electrical engineering courses that I took from undergrad, and be able to effectively communicate with the engineers as well as other senior managers. So it's good to have that understanding of both. So it definitely helped me in that role. And it's also helping me come up to speed faster in my current role, because right now I'm doing energy trading, and there's a lot of people in that group who come from a systems engineering background. So yeah, I would just say it's helped me from a communication standpoint, because I can communicate with engineers as well as the business side of the organization. So.
And it definitely seems like you're, even to add on to that, just listening to you, the organization that you chose is in more of the space that would have more of the engineering elements, or that's going to be a really, integral part of what's happening there. So I think that's even the way that you can talk about the merge there, because the organization you picked. So Jeremy, any thoughts there? And we did get clarification that it's post-completion, so after your degree.
Yeah, post-completion. So, it is a lot to do with, the function of, the company. If it's a very technical, engineering-focused company, of course, you're going to be able to fit in well there and understanding, the technical terms and things like that. But I would argue that, an engineering and business combination is really valuable for any organization, because you can bridge between any technical field for the most part, and now with the business world, and not just from a numbers perspective, but also from a problem solving perspective, because every company is going to have problems that need to be solved, and as part of most people's engineering education, they're taught a specific way to approach problem solving that is pretty efficient and effective. So it's really just kind of how you tailor it to that specific organization is how you can be a bridge between those two worlds. So
I'll echo what Jeremy said. This is probably the fourth or fifth engineering focused event that we've held, and I hear that every single time, that the engineering degree, it's all about problem solving. That's the stick, and so folks with engineering backgrounds are trained exceptionally well in that regard. And then once you add, but then there might be these blind spots as it relates to business, the language, the aspects as it relates to accounting and the budgets and things like that. So I think that's probably the reason you continue to see this combination increase, and you continue to see the number of engineers in those programs increase, is because it is a really valuable combination. And one of the main roles of a business organization is usually to solve a problem or to provide a product or service that solves a problem. So that that cross is naturally there. So to Jeremy's point, I really think it's really about how you communicate that and what extra keys or insights you can provide to your organizations to sell that. But it's a really natural fit, and you know, there are just more examples of that. So with that, I don't see any more questions coming in. So I'd like to thank, did we get one? Nope, we didn't get another question. So I think that's it. But this was a nice conversation. Hopefully you got some value out of it. You got some insights that might help you to just navigate the path, think about it, give you some clarity and approach in how you want to make that decision, and maybe the first step or two that you may want to take as it relates to it. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. Adriana, best of luck to you as you continue forward. And we just appreciate you being here. Have a great day and take care.
Thank you, everybody.